Let's dive in today. It's going to be a good one. I'll have Mikkel joining me here in just a moment. As you guys know, he's back every week. Today, we're going to be diving into a whole bunch of news that is correlated not only to Ripple and XRP, but some of the market indicators that are starting to reveal themselves that could open up what could be the beginning of a bull run. I think a lot of people are asking that question now. Are we in that space? So it's going to be a good one. Stick around for all that. If you're not part of the show, as a subscriber, just do that right now. We always love to have you. Let's just, of course, bring in Mikkel. How's it going, man? This is a weekly
Good.
thing now. Good to see you.
Always great to be on the show, man.
All right, so let's get into a couple of points I want to hit on. One, of course, is what's going on in the Bitcoin community. And this, of course, is drama at the highest level. There is a new Bitcoin proposal that is being put out there. Let me kind of share this with some of those who maybe haven't had a chance to see it completely. But essentially, this is a proposal that would prepare Bitcoin for the eventual quantum threat, which they have verified that it's real. So it's just a matter of time here. And of course, they've put out a proposal that essentially would freeze a whole slew of Bitcoins, including wallets like Satoshi's. And the not only is the community up in arms, but of course, anybody that's been talking about Bitcoin for a long time is up in arms. What do you make of this?
Yeah, I mean, it's first of all going to be a huge problem because the idea that, you have this decentralized money, you have this money that's everyone is talking
Yeah.
about is like immutable from government interaction. And now you're talking about going in and freezing people's money and locking them out of accounts. I mean, look, there's no way I don't think that no mistakes will be made here. They're going to have to draw a line on what accounts get frozen, what accounts don't. Not everyone is super tuned into this stuff. So you could potentially be freezing accounts that aren't supposed to be frozen out of the
Yeah.
chain that was created so people could get away from these types of actions. It highlights a very important feature set that the XRP ledger has, which is the ability to actually rotate keys and be able to update addresses to be quantum proof, where Bitcoin doesn't have that capability. So they're
Right.
forced to do this thing where they're freezing old accounts and locking those down. But there's no way to raise your hand and say, hey, don't lock mine down in a situation like this. So it's really problematic. And I think the biggest piece of it is that it really goes against the entire purpose and the ethos of Bitcoin as a
Right.
whole. I believe this is probably going to be a messy situation. And I hope for that community's sake that there's something better they come up with because it just doesn't seem like to me this is really a clean way to do it.
Well, Charles Hoskinson went after this BIP 361, which is the proposal. And this is something that, I have to give him credit. He wrote about this a long time ago, and he actually warned the community about it that at some point quantum risk would be real. Now we're here with, of course, AI and the idea behind this. And the interesting point that he brought up was the issue of what happens if someone like a BlackRock just decides to hard fork this and say this is the authentic new quantum resistant Bitcoin that all of our institutional investors can feel safe about. That concerns me because that changes the dynamic very quickly from a decentralized platform to a centralized. What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, no, that's a huge piece of this. And ultimately, it comes down to the decision of, right, there's going to have to be lines drawn in terms of what assets are frozen, what assets aren't. And
Jeez.
someone like BlackRock or these large institutional managers, they're going to have a lot of power in this. At the end of
Yeah,
the day,
100%.
one of the things that I have always talked about with the Bitcoin network that I believe is problematic is money controls the network. If you talk about
Mhm.
how these miners are spun up, how they're purchased, how they validate the system, the entire network is controlled by money. And as you have the Bitcoin network become more adopted by society and players with larger amounts of money come in and can influence different pieces, take a look at who's the largest shareholder and a lot of the biggest miners out there. It's
Yep.
BlackRock. So you have to look at these things. I don't think in necessarily a piece where this is the death of Bitcoin or something like that, but it's going to be a huge problem that's going to create a lot of controversy that the community is going to have to get through. And I would say one of the problems with that community consensus is you have two polar opposites in terms of the people
Exactly.
getting involved now and the people who founded the Bitcoin ethos. So it's going to be very interesting to see how those people can get on the same page here with a very difficult problem that I don't think is going to have concrete solutions.
Yeah, I think this could be one of those that goes down in history. And the concern I have is the timing here, because you look at situations like this right here. Charles Schwab has now jumped into it. They're going to enter crypto trading by June. That's next month, essentially. So you're going to have Schwab in this. You're going to have, of course, Fidelity controlling a lot of what's going on in this space. And that, most likely this is going to be Bitcoin ETH and maybe XRP, some other, a handful of tokens. But the point is that you got all the majors jumping in at the same time that possibly Clarity goes through. And then this particular proposal on Bitcoin is all of a sudden raising its interesting head. So I don't know. Timing, strange bedfellows here, guys, for sure.
Yeah,
What do you
and
think
it's
about?
been something you brought up Charles. It's been something that I've been following and kind of dropping the hint on because the Bitcoin community's reaction has always been to say, oh, quantum's not real. We're not going to see it. It's 10 years out and to try to kick the can down the road. But I follow a lot of companies in the quantum space, and it's not a risk I think is really worth taking in terms of how close any particular party is. I
Mhm.
think we both know a government's probably going to have pretty advanced technology before everyone, and they're not going to raise their hand and let all the other parties around the
Just say,
world know
hey, we
exactly where
have it.
they're at.
Yeah.
You've got to be worried about something like this. And I just think the real problem is not necessarily a blockchain specific thing. I think a lot of blockchains are going to have to do something, but it has to do with how the blockchains were orchestrated. Like I said, because XRP can actually rotate the keys and usher in a quantum resistant seed, that is something that's extremely powerful where your address will just be updated to be quantum proof. It
Right.
doesn't come with this massive issue where Bitcoin is like all these addresses where every Bitcoin on earth sits right now is going to be compromised and there's no way to fix that.
Yeah, that's the point. Is this is it's a storm that you can't avoid. It's like a category 5 hurricane just coming at you and there's nothing you can do. It's coming. It's just a matter of how do you prepare. And this is the issue right now. And of course, to your point, the controlling factions outside of MicroStrategy, BlackRock, and now the likes of Goldman Sachs, who is also in the game, joining Morgan Stanley and BlackRock, obviously, which is a very, very fast growth roster of institutions that are packaging cryptocurrencies. And Bitcoin is typically the one that they lead with.
And
Now,
and and
granted,
and they might think about things a little bit differently than the people who got into Bitcoin 13,
yes.
14 years ago, right? They might
Yeah.
have a
Yeah.
different decision on how to move this forward. They might have a different ethos and what they think is important. Maybe for them, those old holders, those old whales, maybe those people aren't really a big deal. Maybe locking them out of their tokens and being able to unlock more of the supply for them, maybe that's actually a good thing. For other people,
Can
maybe
you?
that's a bad thing. It's a completely different ethos. And this is going to be a big change in how the protocol functions at its core in
Right.
being a reserve asset.
Yeah. Well, and I just can't imagine Satoshi's wallets being locked into a basically a unusable Bitcoin. That would be interesting
Yeah,
days
no,
ahead.
in my opinion, it's Satoshi is one of those that I think is actually maybe for the most part, maybe even like a little bit of an easier one. I think the messaging around it's weird, but there's gonna be like there's Satoshi, right? Who I think we know probably is never gonna move his coins. Well, that will be locked into history. That won't be a choice. But there's gonna be a long tail where it gets really blurry on when was
Right.
the last time they moved the coin? Was it 8 years ago? Was it seven
Yeah.
years ago? Are they gonna
Yeah.
draw a line on 7 years ago in 3 days versus 6 years ago? Like there's gonna be lines drawn and people are going to have their Bitcoin frozen and locked out of the network forever. It's going to be something that I believe is going to cause a lot of drama in that community. And we could actually enter into what I think is another hard fork mania, right? Kind of what you
Yeah.
alluded to. And the question is then who has the power there? Is it the people who were on Bitcoin 12, 13 years ago, or is it the new major institutions stepping
It's the
in? Because
institutions.
to be honest,
For sure.
maybe the most important thing about all of this is where is the control? In my opinion, the control is fairly obvious. It's at the on ramp level, it's at the integration level, which
Yeah.
most of these institutions hold anyway. So
Yeah.
they control what you buy, right? When you're a user and you go to the exchange, when you go to a Coinbase, when you go to a Robinhood, guess who picks what coin you're purchasing? That's the
Yep.
social consensus. It's not the people who go to Bitcoin swaps and meet up and trade a dollar for whatever Bitcoin. If these large institutions want to make it so the new de facto is the Bitcoin that they want to push, they can do that by controlling the on ramp.
Well, it's always been the fear that I've had as once that you institutionalize something like Bitcoin, and it has been, is that one day something would happen and now quantum seems to be the catalyst that's pushing it forward. Speaking of institutions, we have now, of course, more ETFs joining into the crowd. But while all that's happening, of course, XRP ETFs continue to pile in, outperforming both Bitcoin and ETH. At some point, I wonder, are we going to start to see institutions realize that this might be the asset to go with versus what some of these other ETFs are offering?
Yeah,
What
well,
do you
I
think?
think we've had a couple conversations about this even off camera. Just the idea that when you talk with a lot of these people who are stepping into crypto now, they have a different view of what the
Yeah.
viewpoint of people 10 to 12 to 15 years ago was.
Mhm. Mhm.
People are looking at this from a different perspective and a different ethos. And we're entering into a market with a whole new investor here. And I think it makes a lot of sense to think that the people coming into the market are going to have a different viewpoint, a different asset selection, and a different category of what they choose in terms of their most important metrics for where they allocate to. And I just think, in terms of where a lot of these institutions have issues with
Yep.
money right now, with transfers, with liquidity, XRP is going to be a very obvious thing to them in terms of the potential use case there. I think it plays perfectly into where these institutions understand the pain points in the current financial system. And I think that's going to make the utility of XRP really stand out in terms of an investment perspective.
Well, and the point I think a lot of people will look at is when you, because you have to remember, this is a different psychological approach toward investing. When you see people onboarding into these institutions, for the most part, some of them are very sophisticated, and then a lot of them are high net worth individuals, don't have a lot of time, to go out and do the research. They essentially are leaning on the institutions to kind of guide them in that right direction. So once that you have these money managers, guys like you, that simply say, hey, listen, it's the easiest thing to do is grab this ETF and that ETF and you're good. And the XRP ETF, I think, is going to continue to fly. Much less, we're going to see more of them in terms of offerings, which is only going to open it up to other, asset managers for sure.
Yeah,
What about?
and I just think the value proposition of being able to explain it, like, you can explain Bitcoin in a way where I think if you really understand the issues with fiat money and you really go into
Mhm.
the reserve piece of having an asset hard coded in terms of money, I think you can make that point to someone. But I think it's harder for a lot of people to see
Right.
than highlighting the inefficiencies in moving money and the brokenness of liquidity in the financial system. I think it's something that a
Yeah.
lot of people experience at one point or another. And if you could just make it resonate to them that there's technology that's going to fix that in a very similar way to email changing the way a lot of people were able to communicate, I
Yep.
think a lot of people resonate with that idea very quickly and can very quickly find something tangible that they can hold on to in terms of their understanding of this network. It's less ethos driven and idealistic
Yeah.
as something that, like Bitcoin, where you're really calling for a new version of money itself. Sometimes that's a difficult concept for people to really get their head around.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. Hey, Mikkel, what do you make of because this is, I feel like we're going to be approaching a Nuremberg trial like phase again with everything that's happening with World Liberty Fi. You've got Justin Sun now airing dirty laundry out there with World Liberty Fi. World Liberty Fi saying, "Hey, we're going to see you in court." You've got all of these issues facing World Liberty Fi now, especially with most recent situation. At some point, do you think that is going to be another major black eye that could possibly cause a slowdown in the market, or do you think this is going to just be no, the market's going to move forward and this will be one of those sideshows that just kind of gets pushed under the rug? Where do you think it stands?
I think it's going to be negative for the longer tail of assets, to be completely honest with you. I think for a
Okay.
long time, the idea of being a cryptocurrency company in itself was like a business, right? It's like, what
Yeah.
do you do? Oh, I'm a cryptocurrency company. What does that mean though, right?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that Ripple highlighted in the very early days. It's not just XRP for XRP to exist. There's a real use case for that XRP to be necessary. And some of these things like the World Liberty Fies and so many different DeFi protocols I see, there's what they're doing in itself isn't necessarily problematic or incorrect, right? If even if you're doing something as just say lending and borrowing, right?
Yeah.
There can be a real use case there where it makes a lot of money and you can run a business around that. The
Mhm.
problem is a lot of the times there's a token attached to it that can create a whole bunch of issues because the token doesn't really have a use case. They try to think of a
Yeah.
million different ways to jam the token into it, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I think this World Liberty Fi thing is going to really highlight that in terms of really having what you could consider maybe a team with more connections than most people would ever have out there,
Yeah, for
and
sure.
them really not being able to make it work. And, I think it's going to continue to be something that highlights some of the issues with these projects that are focusing on these really niche kind of circular applications for their token and what they're doing. And is this really just a lending protocol number 10,000 with a different way of pitching the token? Or are they actually doing something where the token is fundamentally unique and valuable to a brand new value proposition using
Mhm.
cryptocurrency? I think for the top 10, 20, 30 cryptocurrencies, I think they have a lot of what they're doing pretty solidified and there's a good use case put out there. I think for some of the smaller things, I think it's going to cause people to take a step back and say, okay, like what is actually being done here? And is this more than just someone saying they're a cryptocurrency project?
So do you think we're gonna see like a market ticker that is the crypto 20, kinda like the Russell 2000 or, a certain basket of assets that are utility based, have real use case, or have the complete decentralized infrastructure like an Ethereum or something of that nature? Do you think that eventually becomes the market for crypto 2 to 5 years from now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's going to be a big piece of it. Now, I think what's sort of interesting is I think a lot of it gets integrated also as well into like I wouldn't be surprised if you saw a lot of the more conventional indexes starting to even add some of the blue chip
Right.
cryptos to them.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
no, I absolutely think that's going to be a huge piece of it. I think for the vast majority of people, like that's going to be an easy way for them to just grab some exposure to the market.
Mhm.
It's going to be complicated. I mean, for the same exact reason why the vast majority of people should not be picking stocks and individual equities. I think the
Yeah.
same is going to be
All
true
right.
for crypto.
Get a
I've seen
basket.
so many things, and I think it's a huge problem where people get so obsessed with the vision and the idea of what a lot of these projects want to do, they remove themselves of what that project is actually doing and what's realistically possible for them to achieve. Take a look at a project like Ripple and the team Ripple has behind it
Yeah.
and how hard they have fought for the licenses, for the clarity they have gotten with the people
Exactly.
they have in power. That's not something that people are just going to replicate. There's not just going to be
No.
someone who can just do those kinds of things as much as Ripple has done. So I think it's really important for people to really take a look back and say, okay, they can want to achieve something. They can be pitching this idea, but actually executing on that, that's a whole different story.
Yeah.
And the financial ecosystem is a very, very regulated ecosystem. You could have the best idea in the world. You still need the policy people. You still need the lawyers. You still need the people who can get you in the rooms to actually even pitch these ideas into regulated networks. It's an extremely complex thing. And I just think that's where I see the flight to quality really being something that
Yeah.
emerges over the next 5 to 10 years.
Well, and you've got, just in the last 24, XRP, one of the only top 5 up, I think almost 2% right now. Bitcoin and ETH both, and also BNB all came down. Point being is that you see this in that top 5, top 10 crypto group within in general. And I think this is the thing at timing wise with what's happening with clarity is that this is going to open up a huge opportunity. The other thing that plays into this is all of the news that continues to pile in that is pro Ripple. You look at, let me just show you a quick story here that I think is intriguing. And that is when you think about not only where the market is heading, look at where the people are going. So this is an ex Ripple VP now building Japan's XRP strategy, which is launching another $100 million fund. This is again with SBI, and we've had other SBI news, but now this is pretty big because Emmy is now pushing out another 100 million. That could probably end up doubling. Who knows? But it's another venture fund out there. That only increases to me the strength and value of what Ripple brings to the table, which typically all this stuff is going to be centered around XRP. You think we're going to get bigger signs than that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think we're
Yeah.
just at the start of really the emergence of a lot of people really feeling like they now have the
Yeah.
green light to start interacting in this
Bingo.
ecosystem a lot more. And what she's doing in Japan is going to be very important because a lot of people don't know where to start here. They
Mhm.
want to be able to allocate money, they want diversification, they want access to this market, but they don't wanna be out there making the choices, right? So
Right.
through different vehicles, funds, SMAs, different investment products that wrap this asset class up, you are going to have much wider and larger distribution, and I think see larger pools of money come in. If you take a look at how some of the biggest money allocators and biggest high net worth investors or largest family offices invest, a lot of it
Mhm.
is through these different fund products
Yeah.
because they don't want to be making the day-to-day choices, right? They don't want to do the rebalancing. They don't want to have to be thinking about things from a tax efficient perspective. They don't want to be the ones doing the research and saying, okay, well, this is why we should stay 100 feet away from a World Liberty Financial, and this is why we should be
Right.
allocating here. You need
Right.
experts in the space, and I think for a long time, people have actually a little bit shied away from the investment side of these
Mhm.
cryptocurrencies. I think because of some of the stuff with like the SEC and the securities and like securities cases, but I think that's going to change in a big way. And opening the door to capital through some of these products is going to be extremely important.
Yeah. Well, it's the uncertainty, that has happened. Now you've got a pro SEC. You've got the Secretary of the Treasury out there saying, hey, this is the new shift in digital assets. It's going to happen. It's the new Bretton Woods. I mean, literally said Bretton Woods 2.0. This is insane. I mean, it's just so surreal to listen to this stuff happen.
And we've talked about this before, right? Like CFTC pro crypto, SEC pro crypto, then you have the OCC pro crypto, and
Yeah.
now we have Warsh coming in, and it looks like Warsh has got an AI and crypto portfolio. So
Yeah.
every assumption is that he would be fairly pro crypto. You're starting to see, and I've talked about this a lot, it's no longer us as the enthusiasts saying, "Hey, like this is like a very important technology and we think all these people are going to adopt it." Like now you see the people who are actually like structuring how the financial markets work
Right.
themselves coming in and having the same thesis as both me and you and everyone watching here. They see the
Yeah.
same things we do, and then they have the power to actually implement this stuff and allow it to take that next step. So I think that's huge validation to a
Yeah.
lot of this.
Yeah. It is huge validation. And to me, it's such a long time coming. Finally, we're at that point. Let's jump over to kind of the global macro side of things with what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz and with the US. The US now, if you spread between the US gas and seaborne LNG into Europe and Asia, probably the most important valuation metric that nobody's really talking about is how all of this stuff is going to be moving. Because right now you have like the blockade of the blockade, right? And US supremacy is starting to show up there in that area. You layer in Iran, obviously with what was their position, and now Europe needing needing a lot of those resources, China needing those energy resources, and the US setting in here in a position where they become kind of the pincer strategy of pinning all of these economic regions into the US. Do you think this has any effect on, first of all, inflation, and then secondly, any chance of any kind of recession coming at the end of the year?
You know, it's a great question, and I think you'll probably agree with me. What even is a recession anymore? It seems like even if the numbers don't necessarily, even if the numbers are saying there
Oh,
should probably
yeah,
be a recession, they
yeah.
paper it
They don't
over, and
follow.
then it's not a
Yeah,
recession. And then even if you do, and I remember this happened under the Biden administration, they had 2 negative quarters of GDP, which as far as I know, in every single textbook I read, like that was a recession. And then they said, okay, well, we also have to approve the fact that we believe it's a recession. And they just said, okay, it's not a recession. So I believe if you take a look at the fall off in GDP that we just hit, I think it
Yeah,
was a 4.6 or 4.4% quarter
it was
last
significant.
quarter, and then we just got hit with a 0.4% quarter. That's a pretty dramatic drop off, right? That's
Big time.
4 percentage points. We had
Mhm.
a little bit more to that. We could have been in a negative quarter in terms of GDP growth. A lot of that is being fueled by what we're seeing. Now, to the point of inflation, I do believe that this drop off in economic activity is probably in one way or another going to cancel out some of the gas prices and some of the oil increases we're seeing. I think
Okay.
they're moderately going to chop up and down, but if you take a look at where we're at right now, we're at like high 2, low 3 in terms of inflation, which isn't a terrible number at all. I
Right.
always tell people the inflation number is not just going to stick at 2%. It's always throughout
It's
history
gonna be
chopped
up and
up and
down.
down around. So I don't think inflation looks bad. I think Warsh is going to come in, a lot of the GDP falling off and recession or no recession, we're seeing a decline. That's going to be a big catalyst to cut rates. And personally, I like all those things on the cryptocurrency setup. If you take a look at what the S&P 500 is doing right now, I think it's really just bucking this whole Iran
Oh, it's
thing and saying
crazy.
this
Yeah.
this is what we've seen for the past 30, 40 years in terms of Middle East intervention.
Yeah, I'll just bring up this SPX real quick just to show you guys the kind of insane numbers we're talking about right now. That's the SPX right there, guys. Over 7,000, another all-time high. This is happening in a period of I don't know that this has ever happened that fast before. Have you seen we haven't seen this kind of growth this quickly.
It reminded me a lot of COVID, where,
Yeah.
you were in this situation where it's like, "Oh my god, there is so much doom and gloom," and then, like, you gotta, mentally check out a little bit. You're like, "Let the market do what the market's gonna do," and you check back and you're like, "Oh my." When I saw the notification that we were at all-time high on the S&P 500, I had to go to my app and, like, refresh and be like,
Yeah,
"How is that
just
even
make sure.
possible?" We were just talking about, like, a crazy correction coming.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the point that everybody's saying. You got the S&P all-time high. We're sitting at Bitcoin starting to recover a little bit. XRP's moving. But at the same time, we've got all this macro pressure in the Middle East, and it just continues to push. And you have, central banks around the world still kind of a little bit unnerved in terms of how they're going to play it. So Warsh is getting ready to get confirmed. The question I have, does he pull the trigger and cut rates?
That's a really good question, and I'm up against 2 pieces, right? I do think over Warsh's I don't think there's any way that over the next year, year and a half, we don't have lower rates. I think rates are coming down. Whether or not Warsh was going in, I think that's the overall direction. If you look at how the United States handles monetary policy, once you have them start cutting rates, it almost always continues down in a pretty quick fashion. Normally, the start of cuts normally means larger cuts coming. I think Trump has obviously signaled that he is bringing in a Fed president to cut rates. He's talked about negative rates before. I think there's a clear mandate from Trump. I think
Yeah.
Warsh's biggest thing where I question is Warsh going to not want to be associated with just rubber stamping the Trump agenda, right? Does Warsh want to come in and pause a little bit, and then cut so it doesn't look like he was ushered in and they just like whatever
Yeah.
Trump says, boom, boom, boom. That's my biggest hesitancy, but I am extremely confident that over the course of the next year, year and a half, rates come down significantly.
Okay, well, that's a year and a half. That's outside the 26 zone, which right now is leading on Polymarket here at 39% of no cuts this year. If people believe that will happen, if you think that Warsh is going to cut, let me know in the comments. Just put yeah, Fed rate cut. It's incoming. 'Cause that's a big question. I think that still everybody has on their mind as to whether or not. Do you think we hit a Bitcoin top again, all time high in 2026?
Well, I'll touch on that in 1 second. I think the one thing that has made me more confident for cut sooner is that recent GDP print. If we get a negative
Yeah.
GDP print, I think they're cutting to cut very fast.
Right,
I think
right.
if you saw another number, right, another 4% number on GDP, it would be
Oh,
hard to make the economic case that cutting was the right decision. And I
right.
believe Warsh would have been in kind of a tricky situation where, like I said, are you just rubber stamping what Trump wants by cutting with a
Mhm.
4% GDP growth number and with inflation? Maybe a little sketchy with what's going on with oil, but if you
Yeah.
have a number like what we just saw, like zero point 0.4 GDP growth falling from 4.4, like
Yeah.
that to me, if you have one number that's another number decelerating or another number that's negative, I believe that's all he needs to push a rate cut over the finish line and to be able to do so confidently with having data to point to other than saying, hey, Trump put me in position to do this. So I believe I do believe that we are going to get rate cuts. It will happen fairly quickly. And the faster GDP falls off, the higher the probability is that we will see those rate cuts. On the other side of it, in terms of the Bitcoin all time high, I think it's so overdue. I think everything we've watched in terms of the Iran situation, in terms of the clarity, in terms of global adoption, in terms of all the things we've talked about in the first half of the show, put Bitcoin's fundamentals, XRP's fundamentals, the entire cryptocurrency market's fundamentals significantly higher than where they're trading at right now. I believe it. Crypto got thrown out with the bath water. A whole bunch of risk assets sold off. Crypto was thrown in that bucket. And in the same exact way, you saw that happen in a 2008 like event to Apple and Amazon, and then they quickly shot up and recovered, and you moved past it, and everyone said, "Hey, why did we sell off these companies that are doing such incredible things during the
Yeah.
biggest revolution in probably human society in terms of a technology standpoint?" I believe we'll look back at the sell off to crypto the same exact way.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and there's just so many scenarios that I think are all pointing in the right direction. But, us in crypto, man, we have been, I think, faked out so many times. Because it's kind of the nature of the beast. And crypto has such a different kind of market response. It's not like the S&P 500 or a stock, well, with the exception of a handful of stocks. Throw out Tesla or throw out some of these volatile stocks, but for the most part, you don't see those kind of moves. And I think that's what everybody is still concerned about. Is there one more, dump just waiting because of something that insider traders are out there trying to do?
I always like to tell people sometimes it's the swings that really get in people's heads. And one of the
Yes.
things I like to do sometimes is just draw a trend line from the bottoms.
Yep.
And what you'll see is like, I mean, going back, right, like 3,000, then the bottom was 16,000. Then say we had that next bottom was 60,000, right? If I just told you over the past 5 years, an asset went from, we're just taking the bottoms, right? 3,000 to 60,000. A lot of people are probably extremely excited, but you
Yeah.
had a whole bunch of volatility and chop in the middle, and people shake themselves out and they get worried. Look, we're all here for being early, and we're all here for the volatility. You can't have it both ways, right? If you want to go and have a stable, easy return, take
Mhm.
10% a year, the S&P
Buy an ETF.
500 your thing. But part of the disadvantage, part of the hardship, part of the reason why not everyone does this is because being early means a lot of volatility, and that
And
sometimes
pain.
is extremely uncomfortable. But
Yeah,
if you
yeah.
have long-term confidence in the asset you're investing into, and that volatility is only a massive benefit, but it's
Yep.
going to work both ways. Over the long term, though, if the technology is a net benefit to society and is widely adopted, the volatility upside is typically dramatically larger than the volatility to the downside.
Do you think that this continued push to kinda highlight crypto as the bad guy, from and we see it all over the place. I'll just, share something here where Senator Warren has come back out on, the hunt. And this one, of course, is a situation where she's gunning for Musk. Right here, Senator Warren wrote to Elon warning that X Money's upcoming launch possesses consumer, national security, and financial stability risk. But the concern was about the crypto features, because remember, that was just talked about this week. Nikita Bear basically said, "Hey, maybe we should do something on crypto." It was obviously them foreshadowing what's going to happen. But do you think that this continues to still give the Democrats fuel to really start to cause a lot more havoc after the midterms.
I saw the headline and I was like laughing. It's like, how much money has been sent over X money for it to be a systemic problem to the
Yeah,
banking
nothing.
system? I mean, what has it been like? Maybe a couple $1,000s, you think, total? Like, I don't even
Yeah,
think it's technically live or launched yet in any
yeah,
major
it's not.
capacity.
Yeah,
Look, I always say, like, the idea that this is bubbling up to the level where these idiots have the need to talk about it and debate it and say, look, that normally means there's a lot of adoption happening, a
yeah,
lot of growth, and it's moving mainstream. I mean, how long and how many trials have you heard where they drag Zuckerberg up there and they talk about, oh, our social media is destroying everyone and some
gotta get
terrible
it down.
thing and they're going to take down Facebook, and then like just take a look at what Facebook stock has done in the meantime.
Yeah,
Typically, when it starts to bubble up to that level, it normally means there's some level of serious traction going on where this is really starting to get a bite in society.
mainstream.
And the
Yeah,
thing is like they use a lot of scary words and they talk about these things, but I mean they're borderline powerless. I think Elizabeth Warren has passed like 0 over like 80 proposed
exactly,
bills over
yeah.
the past like
Not
6 years.
efficient,
So
yeah.
like bring on the big talk, but in my eyes, if even the fact that this stuff is starting to register on their radar and they can start talking about it in the way they talk about, lets me know that we are making a step function change in terms of the adoption cycle and the understanding of this technology.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, let's jump over to a couple of global things. One is this news right here from Bloomberg. Taiwan overtook the UK in terms of the stock market value. Now it's the seventh largest, which tech firms mainly it's because of tech firms getting back in favor. But the point I'm getting at is, do you think, Mikkel, we're seeing a shift now of the financial centers? London starting to subside, Southeast Asia starting to rise. What do you think?
Yeah, no, it's so funny, what the UK and London and these financial centers have done to their markets in general is almost sad. It's like,
Yeah.
you could not think of a better way to destroy capital. When you look at it, you're almost just like, "Are you trying to destroy capital investment?" Um, and going into, like, a lot of those East Asian countries, they've been extremely good at, like, chips and, like, manufacturing and semis, and I believe that is like the new infrastructure for the world we're
Yeah.
heading into. And the valuations being assigned to these things, especially, I don't know if you've been paying attention to a lot of what's happening in photonics. There's a huge revolution right now in chipsets, data processing, and moving things. And we're at the point where they're fundamentally disrupting the copper wire at this point. Like
Whoa.
wires are taking up 2 rooms. So now they're just beaming information back and forth with light beams. And a lot of this innovation is happening out of Taiwan and under the subsidiaries and the manufacturing arms of someone like a Taiwan Semi. These companies, I saw a funny tweet talking about this, that the tech overlords need their chips for their AI. It's the shovels and the picks to create a lot of this AI
Right.
infrastructure, and all of that is happening where capital deployment is cheap and investable, and that is not in Europe right now.
Yeah, for sure. Well, no doubt about that. Other things that are happening around the world, Pakistan comes in and says, all right, so this central bank, Pakistan, has announced now the removal of its ban on cryptocurrency services, which is a notice sent to all banks and financial tools. It's interesting that this happened a handful of days after JD Vance and the American contingent goes in with Pakistan to try to settle a deal with. I wonder if backroom discussions were talking about stable coins, the advancement of clarity, and that crypto was getting ready to just, level the playing field. And Pakistan is sitting going, wait a minute, what are we doing here? We need to unleash this stuff. And
That's a really good point, actually. I didn't time up the correlation between when the United States
yeah.
went there to this announcement, but I actually think you're onto something there. I would say in general, I do find it a little comical how back and forth a lot of these a lot
Oh
of these
yeah.
countries have been in terms of like we're banning it, we're accepting it, we're banning it. If I had a dollar for every single time I saw either between China and India, they can use crypto, they can't use crypto, they can use
Yeah.
crypto. It's been kind of funny. And ultimately, like, I don't know, it's all one of those things that I always come back when people come to me and stuff like this. It doesn't matter. like the technology is too powerful. They'll be forced to adopt it. Either
Yeah.
they're going to be late to the party and all their capital is going to go offshore and all the business is going to go to countries who are allowing this stuff, or they're going to sit there and say, hey, we want to be in the leader in this. But in the same way as the internet, there was no not accepting or accepting of the internet. It was,
Right.
where is the internet getting built? Because the economics of it do not, it's impossible. Because even if you had the United States saying we're completely closing off the internet, we're not doing anything with the internet, we're banning it, it would have popped up somewhere else. And
Mm.
all those dollars and all those innovations would have went over there. So I just think all of this is inevitable. With the United States stepping into the cryptocurrency world and giving it the green light, I just think you jumped jet fuel on the fire, and finally you're going to start to see it happening at a much more rapid pace.
Yeah. Well, and this I think is going to be the catalyst that could be the one that really starts to shift a lot of these major countries who have been on the fence, maybe now with the U.S. and also what just in general, watching what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz, where Iran has essentially created almost a eight, what was it, 8 billion? Was it 8 billion in crypto or 8 trillion? I can't remember the story headline. It was a ridiculous amount of economic function within Iran that essentially started to I guess, subsidy what they're doing in oil. So the point I'm getting at is if they're watching that, countries who are not necessarily engaged in crypto right now and the opportunities that along with obviously with the US moving forward with crypto, hopefully with crypto activities under clarity could get huge quickly. All right. So last thing, I know you're going to be out at the Vegas event. Are you coming to Consensus in Miami or no?
I am.
Okay, all right.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. No, I am. I'm doing the Vegas to Miami trip.
woo, man, what's going on in Miami for you?
I know we're doing like a event where we're inviting a whole bunch of advisors in the area, and we're going to be putting on sort of a. So we're launching a new sort of program. We're doing sub advisory for a lot of these RIAs. So a lot of these,
Oh, okay.
yeah, existing RIAs where they have a whole bunch of clients who are soliciting them for advice or crypto. We've had this like sort of thing where like a lot of clients are now leaving these advisory firms looking for more pro crypto sort of
Right. Yeah.
advisors. And we're like, well, we don't want to create tension between like us and these firms, right? What we want to do is like say, like, hey, let us just be a sub advisor for you. You keep the client relation, we'll plug you in and give you the crypto access and give you advisory around that. So we're inviting a whole bunch of firms, I think, to some like I don't know, some event they're putting on, and then we're gonna talk with them, put on a show, talk with crypto a little bit. But I think that's the big thing I know of right now.
Very cool. Very cool.
And happy to extend an invite to that if you would like to come as soon as I get a little bit more detail around it.
Yeah, drop it in. I will be down in Miami those days. We're gonna be doing a little bit of moderating a couple of events, a handful of things that are happening at Consensus. So
Whether it's
yeah.
at Vegas or Consensus, we should look to do like an in-person sort of thing. I think that'd be really cool, like an interview or one of these things in person.
Well, you're gonna be at the Vegas fan. We have a whole media set there,
Oh,
so
do you? Oh, awesome.
yeah, yeah,
Whenever
just
you have
come over.
details around that, just send it over.
Yeah, we'll get squared away on that with the producers. And for all of you, if you're not over at the XRP Las Vegas event, you can just go to XRP Las Vegas, hit that. I know Brad is doing still some special offers for access tickets on that. We'll be doing a full media stage there, a whole slew of interviews that are I can't announce some of them because they're going to be announcing some stuff, and if I mention the company names, it would give it away. All right, there's going to be some cool companies there. You don't want to miss it. They're going to be announcing both on stage. We'll have some over at the media booth. Check it all out. You guys know what to do. Mikkel will be back next week here on the pod. So, Mikkel, thanks again for coming in.
Thank you so much. Always a blast.